My husband ignored me. His twin. Noticed the panties and made me feel what I'd forgotten. For 3 years, I lived as a ghost in my own marriage. My husband had emotionally abandoned me long before he physically left, moving across the country for work and leaving me behind without a second thought. I stopped believing I deserved to be seen, touched, or valued. Then I met someone who, by cruel coincidence, looked almost identical to the man who'd destroyed my self-worth, but who treated me like I mattered. What happened between us wasn't revenge or impulse. It was about rediscovering that I was still capable of being desired, still worthy of genuine attention, still alive underneath years of neglect. This is a story about what happens when you've already been abandoned, and someone reminds you that you still exist. If this story helps you understand that you can't betray someone who's already left, please like and subscribe. There are marriages that end with divorce papers and official separations, and then there are marriages that end emotionally years before any legal dissolution, where one partner simply stops participating while the other continues performing the role of devoted spouse to an empty house and an absent partner. For 3 years, I lived in a marriage that had ended in every meaningful way except legally. Married to a man who had moved across the country for his career and left me behind without apparent concern for whether I came with him or stayed behind, who called maybe once a week out of obligation rather than desire, who had made clear through his actions that our marriage was over even if he hadn't bothered to file the paperwork. I'd spent those 3 years in limbo, not quite single but certainly not partnered, waiting for closure that never came while my sense of self slowly dissolved. And then I met someone who looked so much like my husband that my first instinct was shock and confusion, but who treated me with such genuine interest and desire that I remembered what it felt like to be seen as a person worth knowing. What happened between us wasn't betrayal of my marriage. My marriage had been dead for years, abandoned by the man who'd sworn to be my partner. It was about rediscovering myself after years of disappearing. My name is Natalia Reyes, and I'm 36 years old. I'd been married to my husband Andre for 9 years when he accepted a job transfer to São Paulo that would have required us to uproot our entire lives. Andre was 38, worked as a senior engineer for a multinational corporation, had been offered a significant promotion that came with relocation requirement. When the offer came, he'd presented it as fait accompli rather than as decision we'd make together. He was taking the position, was moving to São Paulo, assumed I'd quit my job and follow him because that's what wives were supposed to do. But I had my own career as a nurse practitioner at a clinic where I'd worked for 7 years, had built professional identity and relationships that mattered to me, didn't want to abandon everything I'd worked for to follow Andre to a city where I'd know no one and would have to rebuild completely. I'd asked if we could discuss alternatives. Could he turn down the promotion? Could we try long distance temporarily while I transitioned my career? Could we at least talk about what this move would mean for both of us, rather than just assuming I'd sacrifice my life for his advancement? Andre's response had been clear. He was taking the job whether I came or not. My career wasn't as important as his. If I chose to stay behind, that was my decision. But he wasn't going to let my unwillingness to support his career hold him back. The ultimatum revealed everything about how he saw me and our marriage. I existed to facilitate his success. My own needs and career were irrelevant. Being a supportive wife meant sacrificing everything for his advancement regardless of the cost to me. I'd stayed in Brasilia, partly because I couldn't bring myself to abandon my career and my life for someone who'd made clear he didn't value my sacrifices, partly because I'd hoped that Andre would recognize how devastating his unilateral decision was and would choose our marriage over his promotion, but mostly because I'd been paralyzed by the recognition that my marriage was already over. Andre had chosen his career over me definitively, had made clear that I was optional in his life planning, had emotionally abandoned me even before he'd physically left. That had been 3 years ago. In those 3 years, Andre had visited Brasilia maybe 5 or 6 times, always briefly, always treating the visits as obligations rather than as opportunities to connect with his wife. He'd call once a week, conversations that were perfunctory updates about his work, rather than genuine emotional connection. He'd never asked me to reconsider joining him in São Paulo, had never suggested he missed me or wanted me there, had never acknowledged that living in separate cities for 3 years wasn't actually a marriage, but rather slow-motion ending he was too cowardly to formalize through divorce. I'd existed in strange limbo during those 3 years, not quite single because I was technically still married, but certainly not in any relationship that resembled partnership or even regular contact. I'd stopped wearing my wedding ring after the first year, when I'd realized that maintaining symbols of marriage that had ended felt more dishonest than removing them. I'd told friends and colleagues that my husband worked in another city, simplified explanation that didn't require admitting that he'd effectively abandoned me 3 years ago, and neither of us had bothered to make it official through divorce. What I hadn't done during those 3 years was date or pursue any romantic connections with other people. Partly this was because I was technically still married, even if that marriage was dead. Partly this was because I'd stopped believing I was desirable or worthy of anyone's romantic attention after 3 years of being discarded by the man who'd supposedly loved me. Andre's abandonment had destroyed my self-esteem in ways I hadn't fully recognized. If my own husband didn't value me enough to even maintain basic contact or to care whether we lived in the same city, why would anyone else find me worthy of attention or desire? The encounter that would change everything happened at a medical conference I'd attended in Rio de Janeiro. I was at a networking reception, going through motions of professional socializing while feeling tired and disconnected, when I saw someone across the room who made me freeze in shock. The man looked exactly like Andre. Same height and build, same facial structure, same dark hair with the same slight wave, same overall presence and mannerisms. For a disorienting moment, I thought it actually was Andre, though I knew he was in São Paulo and would never show up at my conference unannounced after 3 years of minimal contact. The man noticed me staring and walked over, smiled in friendly way that was so different from Andre's usual controlled formality. "I'm sorry for staring," I said, feeling embarrassed. "You look exactly like someone I know. The resemblance is actually disturbing. I thought you were my husband for a moment, even though I know he's not here." The man laughed warmly, extended his hand. "I'm Lucas," he said. "I get that sometimes. Apparently, I have one of those faces. And you are?" We started talking, conversation flowing naturally in ways interactions with Andre never had even in early days of our relationship. Lucas was a physical therapist attending the conference, was from Rio, had warm, engaging manner that made me feel immediately comfortable and valued in ways I'd forgotten were possible. We talked for over an hour that evening, conversation ranging from professional topics to more personal territory. Lucas asked about my marriage in ways that were curious rather than invasive, seemed genuinely interested in understanding me as a complete person. I found myself being more honest than I'd intended, telling him about Andre's move to São Paulo 3 years ago, about how he'd left me behind without apparent concern, about the strange limbo I'd been living in where I was technically married but hadn't actually seen or meaningfully interacted with my husband in years. "That sounds incredibly lonely," Lucas said when I'd finished. "Being married to someone who's essentially abandoned you, but without the clean break of divorce. Without the freedom to move forward, but also without any of the connection or partnership that marriage is supposed to provide. You deserve so much better than that, Natalia. You deserve someone who actually wants to be with you, who values your presence in their life, who treats you as partner rather than as optional accessory they can discard when it's convenient." The directness of his assessment was startling and validating simultaneously. Here was someone who could recognize in one conversation what I'd been experiencing for 3 years, but hadn't fully allowed myself to name. Andre had abandoned me, our marriage was over in every meaningful way, and I deserved better than waiting indefinitely for closure that was never coming. Lucas asked if I'd like to have dinner with him that evening, continuing conversation that had been unexpectedly meaningful. I hesitated, still technically married even though that marriage was dead, uncertain whether having dinner alone with another man crossed lines I shouldn't cross. "I know you're married," Lucas said gently, "but from what you've described, your husband abandoned you 3 years ago and hasn't looked back. You're not in a marriage. You're in a holding pattern that neither of you has been brave enough to end officially. Having dinner with someone who actually enjoys your company and wants to spend time with you, that's not betrayal. That's just recognizing that you're still alive and still worthy of being seen and valued." We had dinner that evening at a restaurant near the hotel. The conversation continued for hours, Lucas consistently making me feel interesting and valuable and worthy of attention in ways Andre had never made me feel even when we'd lived together. There was obvious chemistry and attraction between us, not just because Lucas looked so similar to Andre, but because everything else about him was completely different. Where Andre was cold and dismissive, Lucas was warm and engaged. Where Andre made me feel like burden or obligation, Lucas made me feel like someone worth knowing and spending time with. After dinner, Lucas walked me back toward my hotel room. At the door, we both recognized that something significant had developed between us that evening. That what had started as friendly conversation had evolved into genuine mutual attraction and connection. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" Lucas asked. "Not just for conference networking, but because I genuinely want to spend more time with you, want to get to know you better, want to see where this connection might lead." I said yes without hesitation, recognizing that I was making choice to pursue something with Lucas even though I was technically still married to Andre. But I also recognized that choosing Lucas wasn't betraying Andre. Andre had abandoned our marriage 3 years ago, had made clear through his actions that I was optional in his life, had left me in limbo that he'd never bothered to resolve. I couldn't betray someone who'd already left. Lucas and I spent the next 3 days of the conference together, attending sessions during the day and spending evenings together, getting to know each other, building connection that felt genuine and mutual in ways my marriage to Andre had never felt even in its early days. On the final night of the conference, Lucas and I slept together. Not as impulsive mistake or revenge against Andre, but as deliberate choice by two adults who were genuinely attracted to each other and who wanted to be intimate. Being with Lucas physically was revelation. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be desired, to have someone touch me with genuine passion and appreciation rather than obligatory duty, to experience intimacy as mutual pleasure rather than as perfunctory marital maintenance. But beyond the physical attraction was emotional connection. Lucas made me feel valued and interesting and worthy of investment in ways Andre had never made me feel, reminded me that I was still capable of genuine partnership and connection. After the conference ended, Lucas and I continued our relationship long distance. He'd drive from Rio to Brasilia every few weeks, or I'd take weekends to visit him. What we had wasn't just affair or rebound. It was genuine relationship built on mutual respect and desire, and authentic connection. Lucas consistently treated me as partner rather than as optional accessory, made time for me because he genuinely wanted to be with me rather than out of obligation, valued my thoughts and my career and my identity in ways Andre had never valued them. About 4 months into my relationship with Lucas, I finally filed for divorce from Andre. The conversation when I told him was revealing. Andre expressed mild surprise but no real emotional response, seemed more concerned about practical logistics of divorce than about losing me as person he cared about. "I suppose this has been coming for a while," he said, confirming what I'd already known. Our marriage had been over for years. We'd both just been too cowardly or too inert to formalize the ending. The divorce was straightforward since we'd been living separately for 3 years and had minimal shared assets to divide. Andre didn't contest it, didn't try to save the marriage, didn't express any regret about how things had ended. His indifference confirmed that I'd made the right choice in pursuing relationship with Lucas while still technically married. I hadn't betrayed Andre because Andre had abandoned me years before I'd met Lucas. 2 years after meeting Lucas at that conference, After my divorce from Andre finalized and Lucas and I had built solid partnership together. I'm 38 and living life that feels genuinely mine. Lucas and I live together now in Rio, where I've rebuilt my nursing career, and where we've created partnership based on mutual desire and genuine emotional connection. The physical resemblance between Lucas and Andre became less noticeable over time because everything else about them was so completely different. Where Andre had made me feel invisible and worthless, Lucas makes me feel valued and desired and seen. What I learned from 3 years of abandoned marriage to Andre and from relationship with Lucas is that you can't betray someone who's already left, that staying technically married to someone who's abandoned you isn't loyalty, but rather self-destruction, that choosing to pursue genuine connection with someone else when your marriage is already dead isn't infidelity, but rather recognition that you deserve partnership rather than limbo. Andre had ended our marriage when he'd moved to São Paulo and left me behind without looking back. I'd just been too afraid or too conditioned to recognize that ending was final until Lucas had shown me what actual partnership could look like. The cruel coincidence that Lucas looked so much like Andre made the contrast in their treatment of me even more stark. These were two men with nearly identical appearances, but completely different capacities for genuine partnership and emotional connection. Lucas's resemblance to Andre forced me to recognize that Andre's coldness and abandonment weren't inevitable results of my inadequacy, but rather his choices about how to treat me. Choices I didn't have to continue accepting. My name is Natalia Reyes. I was married for 9 years to a man who abandoned me emotionally and physically when he moved across country for his career, who left me in limbo for 3 years without bothering to divorce me or to maintain any meaningful connection. I met someone who looked almost identical to my husband, but who treated me completely differently, who saw me as valuable and desirable and worth investing time and attention in. What happened between us wasn't betrayal of my marriage because my marriage had been dead for years, abandoned by a man who'd made clear I was optional in his life. It was about rediscovering that I was still worthy of genuine partnership, still capable of being desired and valued, still deserving of relationship where both people actually wanted to be together. Sometimes you can't betray someone who's already left. And sometimes finding someone who treats you with basic human dignity and genuine affection isn't infidelity, it's survival. Thank you for reading. If this story helps you understand that you can't betray someone who's already left, please like and subscribe. Claude é uma IA e pode cometer erros. Por favor, verifique as respostas. Sonnet 4.5 Claude é uma IA e pode cometer erros. Por favor, verifique as respostas.